The human rights responsibilities of business is the subject of much attention these days, by corporate giants and governments, by civil society groups and victims too, the world over. CEOs, sustainability advisors, lawyers, diplomats, they are all part of the business and human rights conversation. What are a business's responsibilities to society, to its stakeholders? These are good questions with no easy answer. Well, one answer: companies should respect and uphold human rights. Over the past decade, business and human rights has become one of the leading concepts and framings of business's relationship with the society in which it operates. Not corporate social responsibility, not sustainability, but business and human rights. Over the arc of this course, we will thoroughly examine this idea. We will talk about what it means for a business to have an obligation to protect human rights. Indeed, we'll ask today, should a company have human rights obligations? And if so, what? And to whom? These are perhaps some guiding questions that I hope linger with us as we continue our journey into the universe of business and human rights. In the first half of the course, we will look at the history of the idea, understand what it means in a historical and contemporary context, explore tools and methods deployed to achieve greater business respect for human rights, through the law and beyond the law. In the second half of the course, we will continue examining the notion of business and human rights, but do so not by looking at instruments, institutions and methods, but through the prism of case studies. We will look at several corporate sectors and moments of friction, tension, between business interests and the protection of human rights. Think the technology sector and our right to privacy, companies acting or not on climate change and how that impacts children's rights, instances of modern slavery in supply chains of some of our most cherished products that we consume every day. Think your morning cup of coffee. In this introductory session, we do just that, introduce. We'll introduce ourselves to one another and to the concepts of business and human rights. What are human rights and what is their relevance to modern businesses? First, business. We live in a corporate world, a world dominated by companies, from the food we eat to the clothes we wear to the electronic devices we have in our pockets and on our wrists. Look around, we are surrounded by companies, by business. Businesses are both a beneficiary of globalization and one of its causes. Multinational companies helped usher in waves of globalization, dating back centuries, and are also a chief beneficiary of the increasingly small global village we all inhabit. Today's brands are global brands, whether you're in Melbourne or Mumbai. So many of the companies that service our needs, that surround us, are global brands with a global presence and global supply chains. We live in a world where babies recognize brands just as quickly as their families' faces, and where over half of the major economies of the world are not countries, but companies. We live in a world full of business. We live in a world shaped by business. But what should businesses' responsibilities be to that world, to the societies in which they operate, exploit, and service? In the 1980s, corporate social responsibility, CSR, was the supposed answer to that question. Voluntary corporate action to help society. But CSR is yesterday's news. Today, the dominant discourse around a company's social responsibility is business and human rights. Human rights is not CSR. Is it better? Is it worse? Or just plain different? Let's discuss. Human rights. Human rights are universal freedoms that all of us enjoy, regardless of gender, religion, or nationality. We enjoy them by virtue of us being human. All are predicated on preserving and celebrating the dignity in all of us. Human rights are written down in international legal agreements called treaties. And the home of human rights is the United Nations. The United Nations arose out of the ravages of World War II. The governments of the world coming together to say never again. No more war, and instead envisioned a world founded on human dignity and human rights. Part of the United Nations mission, its reason for existence, was to champion causes like freedom, human dignity, and human rights for all. It did that through such documents as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And since the passage of that landmark document way back in 1948, there have been dozens of human rights treaties negotiated and signed. Nowadays, there are institutions within the UN system dedicated to the championing of human rights and the protection of human rights for all. The UN has also taken steps to encourage not just governments, but also companies to respect human rights. Business and human rights. These are two great concepts of our time. Business on the one hand and human rights on the other. This course is about their interrelationship. How do they relate and connect? How do these two great institutions of modernity, of globalization, how do they interact? What are businesses' impacts on human rights? And what are their responsibilities to protect, preserve, and defend human rights, even as they go about their profit-making activities? I am really looking forward to this journey ahead.